Begin at the beginning, the king said gravely, and go till you come to the end, then stop. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Ever see a master locksmith work? It looks like magic. He plays with a lock, hears things you aren't hearing, sees things you aren't seeing, feels things you aren't feeling, and somehow he manages to figure out the entire combination to a safe. Master communicators work the same way. You can figure out anyone's mental syntax, you can open the combination to the vault of his mind or your own by thinking like a master locksmith. You have to look for things you weren't seeing before, listen for things you weren't hearing before, feel things you weren't feeling before, and ask the questions you didn't know to ask before. If you do that elegantly and attentively, you can elicit anyone's strategies in any situation. You can learn how to give people precisely what they want, and you can teach them how to do the same thing for themselves. The key to eliciting strategies is knowing that people will tell you everything you need to know about their strategies. They'll tell you in words. They'll tell you in the way they use their body. They'll even tell you in the way they use their eyes. You can learn to read a person as skillfully as you can learn to read a map or a book. Remember, a strategy is simply a specific order of representations: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, that produces a specific result. All you need to do is get people to experience their strategy and take careful note of what they do specifically to get back into it. Before you can effectively elicit strategies, you must know what to look for, what the clues are that tell which part of a person's nervous system he is using at any moment. It's also important to recognize some of the common tendencies people develop and to use them to create greater rapport and results. For example, people tend to use a particular part of their neurology, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, more than others. Just as some people are right-handed and others are left-handed, people tend to favor one mode over the others. But before eliciting someone's strategies, we need to find out his main representational system. People who are primarily visual tend to see the world in pictures. They achieve their greatest sense of power by tapping into the visual part of their brain. Because they're trying to keep up with the pictures in their brain, visual people tend to speak quickly. They don't care exactly how they get it out, they're just trying to put words to the pictures. These people tend to speak in visual metaphors. They talk about how things look to them, what patterns they see emerging, whether things look bright or dark. People who are more auditory tend to be more selective about the words they use. They have more resonant voices, and their speech is slower, more rhythmic, and more measured. Since words mean a lot to them, they are careful about what they say. They tend to say things like, "That sounds right to me," or "I can hear what you're saying," or "Everything clicks." People who are more kinesthetic tend to be even slower. They react primarily to feelings. Their voices tend to be deep, and their words often ooze out slowly like molasses. Kinesthetic people use metaphors from the physical world. They're always grasping for something concrete. Things are heavy and intense, and they need to get in touch with things. They say things like, "I'm reaching for an answer, but I haven't got a hold on it yet." Everyone has elements of all three modes, but most people have one system that dominates. When you're learning about people's strategies to understand how they make decisions, you also need to know their main representational system so you can present your message in a way that gets through. If you're dealing with a visually oriented person, you don't want to amble up slowly, take a deep breath, and speak at a snail-like pace. You'll drive him crazy. You've got to speak up so your message matches the way his mind works. Just by watching people and listening to what they say, you can get an immediate impression of which systems they are using. And NLP utilizes even more specific indicators of what's going on in someone's mind. It's long been said that the eyes are windows to the soul. Only recently, however, have we learned how true that is. There's no parapsychological mystery about it. Simply by being observant, by watching a person's eyes, you can immediately see which representational system he's using at a specific time, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. Answer this: what colors were the candles on your birthday cake when you were 12 years old? Take a moment and remember. To answer that question, 90% of you looked up and to the left. That's where right-handed people and even some left-handed people access visual remembered images. Here's another question: how would Mickey Mouse look with a beard? Take a moment to picture this. This time your eyes probably went up and to the right. That's where people's eyes go to access constructed images. So, just by looking at people's eyes, it's possible to know what sensory system they're accessing. By reading their eyes, you can read their strategies. Remember, a strategy is the sequence of internal representations that allow a person to accomplish a particular task. The sequence tells you the how of what someone is doing. Memorize the following charts so you can understand and recognize eye accessing clues. Carry on a conversation with someone and observe his/her eye movements. Ask questions requiring him or her to remember images or sounds or feelings. Which way do her eyes go for each of the questions? Verify to yourself that the chart works. Here are a few types of questions you could ask to get specific kinds of responses. To get visual remembered pictures, you might ask, how many windows are there in your house? What is the first thing you see when you wake up in the morning? What did your boyfriend or girlfriend look like when you were 16? Which is the darkest room in your house? Which of your friends has the shortest hair? What was the color of your first bicycle? What was the smallest animal you saw on your last trip to the zoo? What was the color of your first teacher's hair? Think of all the different colors in your bedroom. Visual constructed, how would you look if you had 3 eyes? Imagine a policeman with a lion's head and a rabbit's tail, with the wings of an eagle. Imagine the skyline of your city going up in wisps of smoke. Can you see yourself with golden hair? Auditory remembered, what was the first thing you said today? What was the first thing someone said to you today? Name one of your favorite songs from when you were younger. What sounds of nature do you like best? What's the 7th word in the Pledge of Allegiance? What's the 9th word in the song, Mary Had a Little Lamb? Sing to yourself the rose. Listen in your mind to a small waterfall on a quiet summer day. Listen in your mind to your favorite song. Which door in your house slams the loudest? Which is softest, the slam of your car door or the slam of your trunk lid? Who of your acquaintances has the pleasantest voice? Auditory constructed, if you could ask any question of Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and John F. Kennedy, what question would you ask? What would you say if someone asked you how we could eliminate the possibility of nuclear war? Image the sound of a car horn becoming that of a flute. Auditory internal dialogue kinesthetic words. Repeat this question to yourself on the inside. What's most important to me in my life now? Imagine the feeling of ice melting in your hand. How did you feel this morning just after you got out of bed? Imagine the feeling of a block of wood changing to silk. How cold was the ocean last time you tested it? Which carpet in your house is the softest? Imagine settling down to a nice hot bath. Think of what it would feel like to slide your hand over a rough piece of bark onto a soft, cool piece of moss. If, for example, a person's eyes go up to the left, he just pictured something from his memory. If they now go toward the left ear, he listened to something. When the eyes go down to the right, the person is accessing the kinesthetic part of his representational system. In the same way, if you're having a difficult time remembering something, it's probably because you are not placing your eyes in a position that gives you clear access to the information you need. If you're trying to remember something you saw a few days ago, looking down to the right will not help you see that image. However, if you look up to the left, you'll discover that you'll be able to remember the information rapidly. Once you know where to look for information stored in your brain, you'll be able to get to it quickly and easily. For about 5 to 10% of people, the direction of these accessing cues will be reversed. See if you can find a left-handed friend or an ambidextrous person with reversed accessing cues. Other aspects of people's physiologies give us clues about their modes. When people are breathing high in their chest, they're thinking visually. When breathing is even, from the diaphragm or the whole chest, they're in an auditory mode. Deep breathing low in the stomach indicates kinesthetic accessing. Observe 3 people breathing, and note the rate and location of their breathing. The voice is equally expressive. Visual people speak in quick bursts and usually have high-pitched, nasal, or strained tonalities. Low, deep tonality and slow speech are usually kinesthetic. An even rhythm and clear, resonant tonality indicate auditory accessing. You can even read skin tone. When you think visually, your face tends to grow paler. A flushed face indicates kinesthetic accessing. When someone's head is up, he's in a visual mode. If it's balanced or slightly cocked, as in listening, he's in auditory. If it's down or the neck muscles are relaxed, he's in kinesthetic. So even with the most minimal communication, you can get clear, unmistakable cues about how a person's mind works and what sorts of messages he uses and responds to. The simplest way to elicit strategies is simply to ask the right questions. Remember, there are strategies for everything, for buying and for selling, for being motivated and for being in love, for attracting people and for being creative. I want to run through some of them with you. The best way to learn is not to observe, but to do. So do these exercises with someone else if at all possible. The key to effective elicitation of a person's strategy is putting him in a fully associated state. Then he has no choice but to tell you exactly what his strategies are, if not verbally, then non-verbally, by eye movements, body change, and so forth. State is the hotline to strategy. It's the switch that opens the circuits to a person's unconscious. Trying to elicit strategy when a person isn't in a fully associated state is like trying to make toast when the toaster's not plugged in. It's like trying to start a car with no battery. You don't want an intellectual discussion, you want people to re-experience the state and thus the syntax that produced it. Again, think of strategies as recipes. If you meet a cook who makes the greatest cake in the world, you may be disappointed to learn that he doesn't know exactly how he makes it. He does it unconsciously. He couldn't answer you if you asked the amounts of the ingredients. He might say, I don't know, a pinch of this and a dash of that. So instead of asking him to tell you, have him show you. Put him in the kitchen, and have him bake the cake. You would note every step he took, and before he threw in that dash of this or that, you would immediately grab it and measure it. By following the cook through the entire process, noting the ingredients, the amounts, and the syntax, you would then have a recipe you could duplicate in the future. Strategy elicitation is exactly the same. You must put the person back in the kitchen, back to the time when he was experiencing a particular state, and then find out what was the very first thing that caused him to go into that state. Was it something he saw or heard? Or was it the touch of something or someone? After he tells you what happened, watch him and ask, what was the very next thing that caused you to be in that state? Was it? And so on, until he's in the state you were pursuing. Every strategy elicitation follows this pattern. You have to get the person in the appropriate state by having him remember a specific time when he was motivated, or felt loved, or felt creative, or whatever strategy you want to elicit. Then get him to reconstruct his strategy by asking clear, succinct questions about the syntax of what he saw, heard, and felt. Finally, after you have the syntax, get the submodalities of the strategy. Find out what specifically about the picture, sounds, and sensations caused the person to be in that state. Was it the size of the picture? The tone of the voice? Try this technique for eliciting a motivation strategy with someone else. First, put the other person in a receptive state. Ask, can you remember a time when you were totally motivated to do something? You're looking for a congruent answer, one in which the person's voice and body language give you the same message in a clear, firm, believable way. Remember, he won't be aware of much of his sequence. If it's been a part of his behavior for a while, he does it very quickly. In order to get each of his steps, you have to ask him to slow down and then pay careful attention to what he says and what his eyes and body tell you. What does it mean if you ask a person, can you remember when you felt very motivated, and the person shrugs and says, yeah. It means he's not yet in the state you want. Sometimes someone will say yes and shake his head no. Same thing. He isn't really associated to the experience, he's not in state. So you have to make sure he's tapped into the specific experience that put him in the right state. So you ask, can you remember a specific time when you were totally motivated to do something? Can you go back to that time and step back into that experience? That should do it almost every time. When you get him in an involved state, ask, as you remember that time, what was the very first thing that caused you to be totally motivated? Was it something you saw, something you heard, or was it the touch of something or someone? If he answers that he once heard a powerful speech and immediately felt motivated to do something, his motivational strategy begins with auditory external A. You wouldn't motivate him by showing him something or by having him do something physical. He responds best to words and sounds. Now you know how to get his attention. But that's not the whole strategy. People respond to things both externally and internally. So you will need to find the internal part of his strategy. Next you ask, after you heard that thing, what was the very next thing that caused you to be totally motivated to do something? Did you picture something in your mind? Did you say something to yourself? Or did you have a certain feeling or emotion? If he answers that he got a picture in his mind, the second part of his strategy is visual internal V. After he hears something that motivates him, he immediately forms a mental picture that gets him more motivated. Chances are it's a picture that helps him focus on what he wants to do. You still don't have his whole strategy, so you need to keep asking, after you heard something and then saw a picture in your mind, what was the very next thing that caused you to be totally motivated? Did you say something to yourself? Did you feel something inside, or did something else happen? If at that point he gets a feeling that makes him totally motivated, he's completed his strategy. He has produced a series of representations, in this case a wiki, which create the state of motivation. He has heard something, seen a picture in his mind, and then felt motivated. Most people need an external stimulus and either 2 or 3 internal ones before they're finished, although some people have strategies involving a sequence of 10 or 15 different representations before they reach the desired state. Now that you know the syntax of his strategy, you need to find out the submodalities. So you ask, what about the thing you heard motivated you? Was it the tone of the person's voice, the actual words themselves, the speed or rhythm of the voice? What did you picture in your mind? Was it a big picture, bright? Once you have asked all this, you can test the responses by telling him in the same tone about something you want to motivate him to do, and then tell him what he'll picture in his mind and the feelings it will create. If you do all this accurately, you will see the person go into a motivated state right before your very eyes. If you doubt the importance of syntax, try changing the order subtly. Then tell him how it will feel and what he'll say to himself, and you'll see him giving you an uninterested stare. You've got the right ingredients in the wrong order. How long does it take to elicit a person's strategy? It depends on the complexity of the activity you want to know about. Sometimes it takes only a minute or two to learn the precise syntax that will motivate him to do just about anything you want. Let's say you're a track coach. You want to motivate the person in the example above to become a great long-distance runner. Although he has some talent and some interest, he's not really motivated to make a commitment. So how would you start? Would you take him out and have him watch your best runners at work? Would you show him the track? Would you talk real fast to get his juices going, to show him how excited you are? No, of course not. Every bit of that behavior would work on a person with a visual strategy, and it would leave this person cold. Instead, you need to sell him by connecting with the auditory stimuli that get him going. To start with, you wouldn't be talking a mile a minute like a visual person would, and you wouldn't go into a slow, drooping kinesthetic rap. You would talk in a well-modulated, steady, clear, resonant voice. You would speak in the exact same submodalities of pitch and tempo that you learn trigger the beginning of his motivation strategy. You might say something like this: I'm sure you've heard a lot about how successful our track program has been. It's really the talk of the school right now. We've been drawing great crowds this year. It's amazing the noise they make. I've had kids say the crowd noise has done wonders. For them, it's kept them going at levels they never expected they could reach. And the raw when you hit the finish line is amazing. I've never heard anything like it in all my years of coaching. Now you're speaking his language. You're using the same representational system he does. You could spend hours showing him the big new stadium, and he'd be nodding off. Let him really hear the roar of the crowd as he crossed the finish line, and you've got him hooked. That's only the first part of the syntax, the hook that gets him going. That by itself won't get him fully motivated. You need to put together the internal sequence as well. Depending on what descriptions he gives you, you might go from the auditory cues to something like this: when you hear the roar of the hometown crowd, you'll be able to picture yourself running the best race of your life. Feeling absolutely motivated to run the race of your life. If you have a business, motivating your employees is most likely a major concern. If it's not, you probably won't have the business for very long. But the more you know about motivational strategies, the more you realize how difficult it is to motivate well. After all, if each of your employees has a different strategy, it's hard to come up with a representation that will fill all their needs. If you simply run your own strategy, you're going to motivate only the people who are like you. You could give the most cogent and well thought out motivational lecture in the world, and unless it addressed the specific strategies of different people, it wouldn't do any good. What can you do about it? Well, understanding strategy should give you two clear ideas. First, every motivational technique aimed at a group should have something for everyone: something visual, something auditory, and something kinesthetic. You should show them things, you should let them hear things, and you should give them feelings. And you should be able to vary your voice and intonation so you hook all three types. Second, there's no substitute for working with people as individuals. You can provide the broad cues to a group that will give everyone something to work with. To tap into the full strategies different people use, it would be ideal to elicit individual strategies. What we've looked at so far is the basic formula for eliciting anyone's strategy. To be able to use it effectively, you need to get more details about each step of the strategy. You need to add the submodalities to the basic pattern. For example, if a person's buying strategy begins with something visual, what is it that catches his eye? Bright colors. Great size. Does he go bonkers at the sight of certain patterns or wild, splashy designs? If he's auditory, is he attracted to sexy voices or to powerful ones? Does he like loud clatter and rumbles or a finely tuned, efficient hum? Knowing someone's main modality is a great start. To be precise, to really punch the right buttons, you need to know more. Understanding strategy is absolutely essential to success in sales. There are some salespeople who understand it instinctively. When they meet a potential client, they immediately develop rapport and elicit his decision-making strategies. They might begin: I noticed you're using our competitor's copy machine. I'm curious. What was the first thing that caused you to want to buy that machine? Was it something you saw or read about it, or did someone tell you about it? Or was it the way you felt about the salesman or product itself? These questions may seem a little strange, but a salesman who has established rapport will say, I'm curious because I really want to fill your needs. The answer to such questions can well provide the salesman with invaluable information about how to present his product in the most effective way. Clients have very specific buying strategies. I'm no different from anyone else when I shop. There are many ways to do things wrong, to try to sell me what I don't want in a way I don't want to hear. There aren't as many ways to get it right. So to be effective, a salesman must take his clients back to a time when they bought something they loved. He has to find out what caused them to decide to buy it. What were the key ingredients and submodalities? A salesman who learns how to elicit strategies will be learning his customers' exact needs. He will then be empowered to truly satisfy those needs and create a long-standing customer. When you elicit someone's strategy, you can learn in moments what might otherwise take days or weeks to learn. What about limiting strategies, like overeating? I used to weigh 268 pounds. How did I balloon to such a size? Easy. I developed a binging or overeating strategy. And it was running me. I found out what my strategy was by thinking about times when I wasn't hungry and yet became ravenous only moments later. As I went back to those times, I asked myself what caused me to feel like eating. Was it something I saw, something I heard, or the touch of something or someone? I realized it was something I saw. I would be driving and suddenly see signs for a certain fast food chain. As soon as I did, I would make a picture in my mind of having my favorite food there, and then I would say to myself, boy, I'm hungry. That would create feelings of hunger, which I would then act on by stopping to order a meal. I may not have been even slightly hungry until I saw the signs that triggered this strategy. And those signs were everywhere. In addition, if someone else asked, do you want to get a bite to eat, even if I wasn't hungry, I would begin to imagine picture in my mind eating certain foods. I would then say to myself, boy, I'm hungry, which would create the feeling of hunger, and I'd say, let's go eat. Then, of course, there were television commercials that kept showing me food after food and asking, aren't you hungry? Aren't you hungry? My brain would respond by making pictures, and I would say to myself, boy, I'm hungry, and that would create the feeling that would direct me into the nearest restaurant. Finally, I changed my behavior by changing my strategy. I set it up so that seeing the food signs triggered my picturing myself looking in the mirror at my fat, ugly body and saying to myself, I look disgusting. I can pass on this meal. Then I imagined myself working out, seeing my body getting stronger, and saying to myself, great job. You're looking good, which created a desire to go work out. I linked all these through repetition, seeing the sign, immediately seeing the fat image of myself, hearing my internal dialogue, and so forth, over and over again, just like a swish pattern, until seeing the signs or hearing, would you like to go to lunch, automatically triggered my new strategy. The result produced by that new strategy is the body I now possess and the eating habits that support me to this day. You, too, can discover strategies with which your unconscious mind is creating results you do not desire. And you can change those strategies. Now, once you discover someone's strategies, you can make him or her feel totally loved by triggering the exact stimuli that caused this feeling to occur within that person. You can also figure out what your own love strategy is. Love strategies are different from many other strategies in one key way. Instead of a 3 or 4 step procedure, there's usually only one step. There's one touch, one thing to say, or one way of looking at a person that makes him or her feel totally loved. Does that mean everyone needs just one thing to feel loved? No. I like to have all 3, and I'm sure you do, too. I want someone to touch me in the right way and tell me they love me and show me they love me. Just as one sense often dominates overall, one way of expressing love instantly unlocks your combination, making you feel totally loved. How do you elicit someone's love strategy? You should already know. What's the first thing you do? What's the first thing you do whenever you're eliciting any strategy? You put the person in the state whose strategy you wish to elicit. Remember, state is the juice that gets the circuits going. So ask the other person, can you remember a time when you felt totally loved? To make sure he or she is in the right state, follow up with, can you remember a specific time when you felt totally loved? Go back to that time. Remember how it felt. Re-experience those feelings in your body now. So you have the person in the right state. Next you have to elicit strategy. Ask, as you remember that time and feel those deep feelings of love, is it absolutely necessary that a person show you love by buying you things, taking you places, or looking at you in a certain way? Is it absolutely necessary that this person show love in this way for you to feel totally loved? Note the answer and its congruency. Next, put the person back into state and say, remember that time when you felt totally loved. In order for you to feel these deep feelings of love, is it absolutely necessary for the person to express his or her love in a certain way for you to feel totally loved? Judge the verbal and non-verbal responses for congruency. Finally, ask, remember how it feels to be totally loved. In order for you to feel those deep feelings of love, is it necessary that someone touch you in a certain way for you to feel totally loved? Once you've discovered the key ingredient that creates these deep feelings of love for a person, you need to discover the specific submodalities. For example, ask, how specifically would someone need to touch you to make you feel totally loved? Have the person demonstrate, and then test it. Touch him or her that way, and if you've done it accurately, you'll see an instantaneous shift in state. I do this in seminars every week, and it never fails. We all have a certain look, a certain way of having a hair stroked, a certain tone of voice, a way of saying, I love you, that reduces us to jello. Most of us didn't know what it was before. But instead, we are able to come up with one thing that makes us feel absolutely, totally loved. It doesn't matter that the people attending the seminars don't know me, that they're standing up in the middle of a room full of strangers. If I run through their love strategy, if I touch them in the right way or look at them in the right way, they just melt. They have very little choice because their brain is receiving the exact signal that creates for them the feeling of being totally loved. A minority of people will at first come up with 2 love strategies instead of just one. They'll think of a touch, and they'll think of something they love to be told. So you have to keep them in the right state and get them to make a distinction. Ask them if they could have the touch but not the sound, would they feel totally loved? If they had the sound but not the touch, would they feel totally loved? If they're in the right state, they'll be able to make a clear distinction without fail. Remember, we need all 3. But there's one that opens the vault, there's one that works magic. Knowing the love strategy of your partner or your child can be one of the most powerful understandings you develop in supporting your relationship. If you know how to make that person feel loved at any moment, that's a pretty powerful tool to have available. If you don't know his/her love strategy, it can be pretty sad. I'm sure we've all been in the situation at least once in our lives when we loved someone and expressed our love, but we weren't believed, or someone expressed love to us, but we didn't believe it. The communication didn't work because the strategies didn't match. There is an interesting dynamic that develops in relationships. In the very beginning of a relationship, the stage 1 called courting, we are very mobilized. So how do we let people know we love them? Do we just tell them that we love them? Do we just show them or just touch them? Of course not. During courting, we do it all. We show each other, we tell each other, we touch each other all the time. Now as time goes on, do we still do all 3? Some couples do. They are the exception, not the rule. Now, do we love the person any less? Of course not. We just aren't as mobilized anymore. We feel comfortable in the relationship. We know that person loves us, and we love that person. So how do we now communicate our feelings of love? Probably just as we would like to receive it. If so, what happens to the quality of the feelings of love in the relationship? Let's take a look. If a husband has an auditory love strategy, how is he most likely to express his love to his wife? By telling her, of course. But what if she has a visual love strategy, so her brain causes her to feel deeply loved only after it receives certain visual stimuli? What will happen as time goes by? Neither member of this relationship is going to feel totally loved. When they were courting, they did it all, showed, told, and touched, and triggered each other's love strategies. Now the husband comes in and says, I love you, honey, and she replies, no, you don't. He asks, what are you talking about? How can you say that? She may say, talk is cheap. You never bring me flowers anymore. You never take me places with you. You never look at me in that special way. What do you mean, look at you? He may ask. I'm telling you I love you. She is no longer experiencing her deepest feelings of being loved because the specific stimulus that triggers that feeling is no longer being consistently applied by her husband. Or consider the opposite, the husband as visual and the wife as auditory. He shows his wife he loves her by buying her things, taking her places, sending her flowers. One day she says, you don't love me. He's upset. How can you say that? Look at this home I bought for you, all the places I take you. She says, yeah, but you never say you love me, I love you. He screams in a tonality not even close to her strategy. As a result, she doesn't feel loved. Or how about one of the greatest mismatches of all time, a kinesthetic man and a visually oriented woman? He comes home and wants to hug her. Don't touch me, she says. You're always grabbing at me. All you ever want to do is hunker down and hug. Why can't we go someplace? Look at me before you touch me. Do any of these scenarios sound familiar? Can you see now how a relationship you had in the past ended because in the beginning you did it all, but as time went by you began to communicate love in one way, and your partner needed it in another, or vice versa? Awareness is a powerful tool. Most of us think our map of the world is the way it is. We think, I know what makes me feel loved. That must be what works for everyone else. We forget that the map is not the territory. It's only how we see the territory. Now that you know how to elicit a love strategy, sit down with your partner and find out what makes him or her feel totally loved. And having elicited your own love strategy, teach your partner how to trigger your feeling totally loved. The changes this understanding can make in the quality of your relationship are worth your investment in this book many times over. People have strategies for everything. If someone gets up in the morning totally awake and alive, he has a strategy to do just that, though he probably doesn't know what it is. But if you ask him, he'll be able to tell you what he says or feels or sees that gets him going. Remember, the way to elicit a strategy is to put the cook in the kitchen. That is, get him to go into the state you want, and then, while he's there, find out what he did to create and maintain the state. You might ask a person who wakes up easily in the morning to remember a specific morning when he woke up quickly and easily. Ask him to recall the very first thing he became conscious of. He may say he heard an internal voice that said, "It's time to get up, let's go." Then ask him to remember the very next thing that caused him to wake up quickly. Did he picture something or feel something? He may say, "I pictured myself jumping out of bed and getting in the warm shower. I shook my body, and then I got out." Seems like a simple strategy. Next, you want to find out the specific kinds and amounts of ingredients, so you would ask, what was the voice like that said it's time to get out of bed? What was it about the quality of the voice that got you up? He will probably answer, the voice was loud, and it was talking very fast. Now ask, what was the scene like that you pictured? He may answer, it was bright and moving fast. Now you can try this strategy for yourself. I think you'll discover, as I did, that by speeding up your words and pictures, increasing volume and brightness, you can wake up in an instant. Conversely, if you're having a hard time going to sleep, just slow down your own internal dialogue and create yawning, sleepy tones, and you'll feel yourself become very tired almost immediately. Try it right now. Talk very slowly like a very tired person in a yawning voice inside your head. Talk about how tired yawn you are. Now speed it up. Feel the difference. The point is, you can model any strategy, as long as you put someone in state and find out specifically what he does, in what order and sequence. The key isn't to merely learn a few strategies and then use them. The most important thing is to constantly stay attuned to what people do well, and then to find out how they do it, what their strategies are. That's what modeling is all about. NLP is like the nuclear physics of the mind. Physics deals with the structure of reality, the nature of the world. NLP does the same thing for your mind. It allows you to break things down into the component parts that make them work. People have spent a lifetime trying to find a way to feel totally loved. They've spent fortunes trying to get to know themselves with analysts and read dozens of books on how to succeed. NLP gives us the technology to accomplish these and many other goals elegantly, efficiently, and effectively now. As we've already seen, one way to get in a resourceful state is through syntax and internal representation. Another way is through physiology. Earlier, we talked about how mind and body are linked in a cybernetic loop. In this chapter, we discussed the mental side of state. Now let's look at the other side. Let's look at